Well, I was saying that, you know, at a neutral level, it hasn't dipped, but us staying at the same level is not so good. And you were saying actually the fact that we're holding up is actually a good sign.
Yes, given all the noise out there saying that things are slowing down and what the downside is, compared to this index now for 3 quarters since the middle of last year, essentially stable. +5 is not a high number compared to the levels where we used to be. It is in line with a neutral level for the last 20 years. So the index at this point in time is not boosting the consumer situation, but it is also not signaling that the consumer situation is falling away in an overall sense. But in the detail there is some movement.
When last week we were talking a little bit about, we talked about the retail consumer, the retail index, actually the retail confidence index, and one of the things that we discussed at length last week was just about how retailers were saying that durable goods not moving as much as semi-durable goods were doing, and now there is some comment that the fact that people aren't buying durable goods is a sign that consumer expenditure is slowing down.
In other words, when you look at the FMBB, our Consumer Confidence Index, it is made up of 3 components, of which one component is whether now is a good time to buy durable goods. That particular subcomponent has fallen 4 points to -6, which also happens to be in line with its 20-year average. So of its own, it is not necessarily signaling anything major. At the same time, it has eased. And as you've indicated, we find that when it comes to actual sales volumes, retail, the growth halved in January compared to December. And of course, also the motor trade has eased very substantially from 50% growth last year to just over 7% in January and over 6% in February. So there is evidence of slowing down. And we find that then corroborated in this particular survey on the particular question, is now a good time to buy durables. We don't find it collaborated on the other 2 components.
One of the things that I found quite interesting was that consumers remain more optimistic about their own financial future compared to what was happening in the country on a nationwide basis, which is actually quite interesting to me, because one of the things that would give us, you know, some of this confidence would be in employment that has fit into that. So why do you think consumers are feeling that?
I think it has a lot to do with the income generation that is taking place, and of course employment is only one component of income generation. The fact that households signal that their sense of their own financial prospects remains stable, unchanged, and at high levels. In other words, there is a majority, a sizable majority, that indicates satisfaction with their own finances. It's for me indicative that the consumer is not losing it at this point in time. If there is change, there is marginal change taking place. But we can see in the actual sales levels, especially on the durable side, that there is some change taking place.
Let's talk a little bit about inflation. And just, I was reading a report, well, not a report, but the speech that the governor gave on Saturday. And it was actually quite interesting, you know, that she was talking about inflation going forward, that it could change at any time. You know, right now we could be seeing the markets doing good, but that could change very quickly. So when we talk about inflation going forward and how that could really hurt the consumer if we were to see inflation go in the uptick.
Yeah, well, the speech by the governor was specifically a structural speech. In other words, she went into quite some detail into the greater context, both internationally and local. And when it comes to our inflation environment, the projection has been for the past year that the CPI inflation will peak in around about 6.5% territory. The last number was 6.3. The 6.5 is expected any time, either this month or next month or the month thereafter. And whether 6.5 is the peak, we can argue about. It may be 6.6 or 6.7. But later in the year, just about everybody is suggesting that headline inflation will start to ease. Not massively, but that it will come back into the target zone. But that is short of any major shock coming from the outside world, the kinds of things that the governor was exploring in her speech, whether it is oil or whether it is Europe or whether it is anything else. The specific remark where the markets became excited over the weekend had to do with the core inflation. Now that too, for the last 12 months, has been projected to steadily rise, but to peak out in, say, 5.5% territory, stabilize, and then to start coming down. I think it is a little early to start to suggest that there is a different tenor to that. But that is what the governor did in her speech.
Do you think that it's too early to be talking about, you know, things like taxation and how that has changed, you know, for the consumer,
No,
administered prices, petrol? Do you think it's too soon to be talking about that? Because it seems as though the consumer, when you look at this index, probably hasn't factored that in, or have they?
No, the survey was done between the 8th and the 21st of February. So the good news per the budget still had to come. And I would not be surprised when we get to the next survey in the second quarter in June, that in fact that will then be incorporated. And we should not be surprised if this index were to actually show some more sliding, given the news that we got out of the budget on both the taxation side and the government spending side, the wage increases that the minister had in mind. So besides the fact that inflation is rising and is eroding real income gains, the minister is now also going to do his bit from here onward in terms of both the taxation proposals and his spending proposals. So the consumer should encounter an easing situation income-wise, and that should translate into slower spending, as most people seem to be expecting.